how it would feel to stand with the temple. Listen, before we step into armor and dust, let me set the hook the way a true road story should begin. With a door you do not forget the sound of when it closes behind you. If I were a Templar, the first thing I'd learn is that the Order is less a legend and more a machine, built for distance, heat, fear, and repetition. The songs people sing about us would never mention the small things that actually shape you. The weight of a wet wool cloak after a cold night ride, the taste of brackish water pulled from a cistern, the way your hands smell after oil and leather and steel, and the silence you keep because silence is a weapon. You'd think the great moments are banners, cavalry charges, holy relics held high, but the truth is, history turns on supply lines, on discipline, on who holds the wells, on who can ride for 2 days without breaking formation, on who can sleep in armor and still wake up ready. And the land, God, this land. You would not visit the Holy Land, it would invade you. Limestone hills that glare white under the sun, wadis that become sudden knives of floodwater, coastal plains that look gentle until mounted archers turn them into open killing fields. You would smell oranges near Jaffa and blood near Gaza. You would learn every ridge and pass by the ache in your knees. So here is the promise of this story. I'm going to take you there as if you are walking at my shoulder. You'll see the places the way a rider sees them, measured in hours, water skins, and risk. You'll hear the prayers the way they sound when you are exhausted and not sure you'll live to finish them. And when battles come, we won't skim the surface. We'll talk about terrain, morale, tactics, weather, and the human cost that doesn't fit into a romance. If you want more episodes like this, stories that feel like a documentary you can live inside, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and like this video. It genuinely helps the channel grow, and it tells me you want the next chapter. Now, take a breath. Tighten the girth strap. We ride. Chapter 1. The Vow, the Road, and the Temple Mount. If you stood with me on the morning I left my home in Champaign, you'd remember the cold first. Northern cold that bites through cloth and turns breath into small ghosts. People imagine a Crusader departure as trumpets and glory. What it really is, most of the time, is a quiet, stubborn decision. I'd have said goodbye without drama because drama makes you look back, and looking back makes you hesitate. The Order does not want hesitant men. The road to the east would teach you distance as a kind of violence. You'd cross rivers that smell of mud and reeds, pass villages where the church bells are familiar, then move into lands where the language changes, the bread changes, the faces change. In Italian ports, Bari, Brindisi, sometimes Venice if politics align, you'd feel the sea as the first truly foreign thing. Salt wind, tar, rope fiber, the constant groan of wood. Ships are not romantic when you're packed in with men and animals, when storms turn prayer into a reflex. You learn quickly. The ocean doesn't care about your vow. When we finally reach the Levant, the light is different. It's not just brighter, it's sharper, as if the sky has fewer layers between you and God. The coastline near Acre and Jaffa can look almost welcoming. Green patches, cultivated fields, stone farm walls. But you'd feel the tension immediately, because the coast is a corridor. Armies move through corridors. Raiders move through corridors. Pilgrims move through corridors, and pilgrims are why we exist. You'd meet the Order first through its discipline. A Templar house is not a castle full of feasting knights. It's a working fortress. The day is divided by bells and rules. The rule teaches you to eat without indulgence, to keep your weapons ready, to speak with restraint. Even the clothes are part of the system. The white mantle is not vanity, it's identification and obligation. It tells everyone, friend, enemy, peasant, king, that you belong to the order before you belong to yourself. And then, Jerusalem. If you walked beside me up toward the city, you'd understand why people risked everything to see it. The hills rise in steps of stone, terraced and dry, with olive groves that look like old men standing in rows. The air carries dust, plant resin. The city itself is a hard silhouette of walls and towers. Inside, it's a knot of faiths and markets and rivalries, narrow streets, shouting vendors, animals, pilgrims weeping in corners, soldiers watching from doorways. The scent is layered, spices, sweat, incense, and the sour edge of refuse in the heat. Our headquarters, our heart, is on the Temple Mount. The building we occupy is what many call Solomon's Temple, though it is a complex reality of older structures, adapted, repurposed, fought over, and sanctified by memory. People think the temple is a single room with treasure hidden under stones. What it feels like to live there is different. Thick walls that hold heat, courtyards that echo with boots, stairways worn smooth by centuries, and the constant sense that you are living on a crossroads of the world. Here is what you would see if you lived my early months. Maps and ledgers as often as swords, men arriving wounded from patrols, horses being shod, grain measured, water rationed. The most important weapon in the order is not the lance. It is coordination. Patrol schedules, signal routes, agreements with local lords, intelligence from travelers. You learn to read the land like scripture, which valleys allow ambush, which ridges give visibility, where a small spring can save a patrol or doom it if the enemy knows you need it. Our work is escort as much as war. Picture a line of pilgrims, old men, young women, children, moving like a slow river along a road that cuts through scrub and stone. From a distance, it looks harmless. Up close, you notice how exposed they are. The Levant can be generous, but it's also built for raiding. Small bands can vanish into folds of terrain, appear at a bend, strike, and disappear again. So we ride in disciplined spacing, not bunched like proud knights in a tournament. We keep scouts forward and to the flanks. We choose routes based on water and defensible ground, not on what looks shortest on a map. And you learn the enemy is not a single face. Some threats are organized forces, emirs, professional soldiers, mounted archers who ride like the wind and shoot like they have strings tied to your heart. Other threats are smaller, opportunists who know a pilgrim is wealth in motion. The hardest part is not bravery. The hardest part is restraint, knowing when to pursue and when pursuit is a trap. If you ask me what the first real battle felt like, I wouldn't describe a grand clash. I'd describe a sudden eruption on a ridgeline, the hiss of arrows, not the crash of swords, the panic of civilians when they realize they're being hunted, the way your mind narrows to small tasks. Keep the line, protect the center, drive off the attackers without being drawn into the hills. Afterward, you'd see the cost. Arrows pulled from bodies, prayers whispered over the dying, the quiet rage of surviving family members. You would also see something few stories mention: the paperwork of loss, equipment replaced, horses reassigned, men recorded as dead. The order's strength is that it keeps functioning, even as it bleeds. At night on the Mount, When Jerusalem cools and the city noise softens, the temple feels like a ship anchored in a sea of history. You'd hear distant calls, footsteps in corridors, the clink of armor set down, and you'd understand the vow is not a burst of holiness. It is a long, grinding decision to keep doing the job tomorrow and the day after, until you no longer recognize the man you were before you put on the mantle. Chapter 2. Castles of Stone, Cavalry of Iron, and the Logic of War. Let me take you north first, because the geography explains the strategy. If you rode with me from Jerusalem toward the coastal fortresses, you'd watch the land change by degrees. The Judean hills give way to lower country and broader fields, and then you smell the sea again. Cooler air, salt, and the dampness that creeps into gear. Along the coast, the great ports matter because they are lifelines. Men and supplies come by sea. Money moves through harbors. Reinforcements arrive like weather, unpredictable, desperately needed. Our castles are not just symbols. They are locks on roads and valleys. Think of them as machines built into terrain. Their placement is never accidental. A fortress watches a pass, controls a river crossing, or anchors a frontier line where patrols can ride out and return without being swallowed by distance. Within their walls, you'd see workshops, granaries, stables, chapels, armories, everything required to keep war going when the countryside is unsafe. Now, about fighting. If you expect constant hand-to-hand heroism, you'd be disappointed. Medieval war is logistics wrapped in violence. Most days are scouting, repairing, training, hauling water, negotiating with local powers, and trying not to get surprised. Training in the order is not about flair. It is about repeatable behavior under fear, mounting quickly, riding in formation, holding your lance correctly so the shock of impact doesn't shatter your shoulder, maintaining your gear so it doesn't fail when you need it most. You'd hear the same instructions until they become part of your bones. Do not break formation. Do not chase alone. Do not abandon the standard. And the enemy, especially the mounted archers, teaches you humility. They don't fight your preferred battle. They orbit you, sting you, test your temper. If you charge too soon, you break your line and they devour you in pieces. If you stay too rigid, you get bled slowly at range. The answer is discipline with flexibility. Screens of lighter troops, controlled advances, choosing ground that limits their maneuver, protecting water sources so you aren't forced into desperate movement. When a major engagement comes, it is rarely spontaneous. It is often the result of marching, miscalculation, pride, or necessity. The land decides outcomes more often than ideology does. I remember one campaign where heat became the real commander. You'd think armor is your friend until the sun turns it into a furnace. The hauberk, the chainmail, sits on your shoulders like a wet net of iron. The padding beneath traps sweat. Your mouth dries until your tongue feels like cloth. Horses suffer too. They need water and rest, and a thirsty horse is a dying horse. If you were there, you'd notice how commanders obsess over wells and springs. A well is not a convenience. It's a fortress without walls. Lose it, and you lose the campaign. In battle, you'd hear less shouting than you expect. There is shouting, yes, orders, warnings, prayers, but much of it is the dull roar of bodies in motion. Hooves drumming earth, the slap of leather, the creak of saddles, arrows landing with a sound like heavy rain, and then impact, the moment a disciplined charge hits. It is not two men dueling, it is mass meeting mass. And the physics of it can snap bones through armor. Here's what a charge feels like from inside it. Your world becomes the neck of your horse and the banner ahead. You lock your knees, set your lance, and ride as part of a single creature. You feel fear, but you don't have time to negotiate with it. If the line holds, you hit like a wall, moving at speed. If it breaks, you become isolated, and suddenly the battlefield is full of angles where death can reach you. After battles, castles swallow the wounded. You'd see surgeons who are more practical than holy, cutting away rotten flesh, pouring wine on wounds, praying not because prayer is a cure, but because it's what you do when control ends. You'd see brothers writing letters that may never reach home because distance eats messages, and in quieter moments, you'd notice the cultural complexity most stories flatten. The Levant is not a chessboard of two colors, it's a layered society. Latin settlers, local Christians, Muslims of many regions, merchants from everywhere, Armenians, Syriacs, Greeks. Trade continues even when politics are hostile. Intelligence travels through markets, alliances shift. A truce can exist beside a raid, and both sides can justify it. Living inside that reality changes you. It makes you less impressed by slogans and more impressed by competence. The order, at its best, is competence made into faith. But competence is not enough when history turns. Chapter 3, Fire in the Dry Grass, the Crisis of the Kingdom. There is a point in every long conflict when the air itself feels like it is waiting. If you were with me in the years when the balance began to break, you would sense it in small things before the disasters arrived. Fortresses requesting more men than we could spare, patrols returning with sharper reports, rumors moving faster than official messages, the way merchants started to speak with caution, measuring the road with their eyes. And then the great truth becomes unavoidable. A frontier is only stable when it is fed by reinforcements, by money, by unified leadership. When leadership fractures, the frontier becomes a thin skin over a wound. You would watch politics poison strategy, lords arguing over prestige while the enemy concentrates strength, rivalries inside the Crusader states making coordinated defense harder. And on the other side, you would see a force that is increasingly unified, disciplined, and led by men who understand how to use time as a weapon, how to starve an enemy of options, how to force marches in heat, how to choose ground. I want you to imagine marching inland when water is uncertain. The landscape turns harsh and open. Grass becomes sparse. The horizon trembles with heat. Every step feels like spending a coin you might not have later. Scouts ride out and come back tight-faced. You taste dust even when you aren't speaking. This is the kind of movement that ends not in victory or defeat, but in collapse. When catastrophe strikes, it doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It arrives like a door slowly closing. If you stood beside me on a day when an army is trapped without water, you'd understand why men lose discipline. Thirst makes cowards out of the brave and madmen out of the cautious. Horses begin to stumble, tongues swell, tempers flare, orders become harder to enforce. And then, when the enemy presses, arrows, harassment, feints, your army bleeds while it moves. You are being shaped into a weaker form. Battle under those conditions is not a contest of ideals. It is a contest of endurance and positioning. The enemy doesn't need to destroy you immediately. They need to prevent you from reaching relief. And when the line finally breaks, it breaks everywhere at once. Units separate. Standards vanish in dust. The sounds become fragments, screaming, metal on metal, hooves that no longer run in formation. Men who were brothers become lone survivors, each fighting a private war in a crowd. Afterwards, the world feels smaller. Strongholds that once felt permanent feel like islands. Refugees crowd roads. The tone of conversation changes. Less confidence, more counting. Counting provisions, counting days, counting how many men are left to hold which walls. Jerusalem, if it falls in your lifetime, does not fall in your imagination. It falls in logistical reality. Garrisons too thin, relief too slow, political will too fractured. When you stand on a wall and look out at an encircling army, you feel the geometry of it. Siege is math. How many stones in the wall, how many days of grain, how many arrows, how many able-bodied men to rotate watch and still repair breaches. The city's sacredness does not make it immune to siege engines. If you were there, you would see the unromantic details. Teams hauling timber, digging trenches, building platforms for engines, moving under cover of shields and screens. You would smell pitch, smoke, human waste trapped behind walls. Disease becomes a quiet ally of the besieger. Morale becomes a resource that can be exhausted. And then when surrender or evacuation becomes inevitable, you learn another hard truth. Survival is sometimes the only victory left. The order, if it is to continue, must preserve its core. That means retreat to the coast, to the ports, to the remaining fortresses. It means swallowing grief and doing the next necessary thing. If you listen closely, you can hear history's pivot in those moments, not in speeches, but in the sound of gates closing behind you as you ride away from what you were sworn to protect. Chapter 4. The Last Stronghold and the Long Shadow Home. If you rode with me into the final years of the Crusader presence, you would feel the coast as both refuge and trap. Ports like Acre become crowded with everything a collapsing frontier produces. Soldiers, pilgrims trying to escape, merchants gambling on one last profitable voyage, clergy arguing over meaning while laborers haul stones to repair walls. Acre, in particular, is a city that breathes the sea. The air is wet and salty. The streets are tight, noisy, and tense. Fortifications dominate your vision, towers, walls, gates, and the constant effort to strengthen weak points. The harbor is life, but it's also exposure. Ships can bring reinforcements, but blockades and raids can choke you. Siege at the end is relentless because it is systematic. The enemy has learned, adapted, and grown stronger in its ability to coordinate. The defenders are experienced but exhausted. You can feel it in the way men move, still disciplined, but with less elasticity in the spirit. If you stood with me on the walls during the final siege, you would see the battlefield as a construction site of destruction. Siege towers creeping forward like moving buildings. Miners digging to collapse sections of wall. Catapults and trebuchets launching stones that arrive with a sound you feel in your teeth. Fire as a strategic tool. Burning ladders, burning platforms, burning anything that might become a foothold. And inside the city, you would see courage that is not glamorous. Men hauling water to douse flames, others carrying the wounded down stairways slick with blood. Commanders trying to keep order while civilians cry and pack belongings as if packing can protect them from a collapsing world. When the breach finally opens, defense becomes a series of desperate choke points. Streets become trenches. Doorways become mini fortresses. The order's discipline shows in retreat as much as in advance. pulling back in controlled steps, buying time so others can escape, holding a line not because it will win, but because it must hold long enough. If you survived that, if you made it to a ship and watched the coastline recede, you would carry a particular kind of silence. The sea would feel colder than before, not because the air changed, but because you understand what you left behind. And then comes the strange second life, the Order in Europe. People imagine we returned as heroes. In reality, we returned as an institution with wealth, land, and secrets, real or imagined. We returned to kings who had borrowed money, to nobles who resented our privileges, to clergy who watched our independence with suspicion. The further you get from the Levant, the more the story becomes politics, not war. If you were with me in France years later, you would feel how different danger can be. In the East, danger rides on horseback. In the West, it wears fine clothing and speaks in legal language. You would hear accusations whispered first, then spoken openly: heresy, blasphemy, corruption. Some men would panic. Others would insist the truth would protect us. But truth is not always the currency that buys survival when power decides to collect a debt. The arrests, when they come, feel unreal precisely because they are organized. Soldiers arrive with orders sealed in wax. Brothers are taken from houses in the dawn. There is no battlefield, no banner, no enemy cavalry on the horizon, only the cold efficiency of the state. If you stood beside me in a stone chamber, you would learn how fragile a reputation is, how quickly a legend can be flipped into a weapon against you, how fear can manufacture certainty in the minds of those who need a scapegoat. And yet, even there, something remains that no decree can fully erase: the memory of the roads we held, the pilgrims who reached their destinations alive because disciplined men rode the flanks, the fortresses that stood like anchors in hostile terrain. History can judge us harshly or kindly depending on who tells it, but it cannot change the fact that we were part of the machinery of an era: steel, prayer, logistics, and loss. So, if you ask me what I would have seen as a Templar, I'll tell you this: I would have seen the world as connected by routes, sea lanes, caravan trails, mountain passes, and political agreements, each one a vein that carries life or death. I would have seen that faith without organization collapses, and organization without humanity becomes cruel. I would have seen men become legends and then become prisoners. I would have seen cities shine in morning light and burn in evening smoke. And I would have learned the hardest lesson of all, that even the most sacred vows live inside time, and time always collects its due. Ending. Quick reminder: if you want the next series like this, more immersive, documentary-style historical storytelling, you can upload straight into voice narration. Please subscribe and like the video. It's the clearest signal that you want more chapters, and it helps the channel reach the right audience.